My number 5 is Uncut Gems.
Really?
Yep. Are we talking about it?
Interesting. Yeah, we're talking about it.
Okay. Yeah, this movie, much like you said that you keep coming back to a movie like Booksmart, I keep coming back to thinking about Uncut Gems, and a lot of it has to do with the Safdie brothers' ability to hold me as a moviegoer for the running time of this film, which somehow seems like it's like 3 hours long, but also seems like it's 5 minutes long. It's a kinetic film that never gives you time to slow down, and it's a breakneck pace, but it's not physically a breakneck pace. It is emotionally draining, and part of me wants it to just stop or wants things to just like slow down. And especially looking at the character who is an addictive gambler, and us seeing him devolve in front of our eyes, I inherently just want him to slow down just so that I can take a breath. And I think that, much like we were talking about how tone is so important, and how someone like Taika Waititi can be that kind of master of tone, I think somehow these Safdie brothers are very masterful at containing an audience and at pushing one way or the other, keeping you on the rails, but kind of like keeping you on the edge. It's, instead of having all 4 wheels on the road, you've got 2 wheels off somehow at all times. So it's unsettling, and that makes me want to revisit it, go back, and in a lot of ways just figure out how they did that to me. It's like you guys kind of like tricked me into really focusing in on this character, caring about what he was doing. And it's the old cliche of like, don't open the door, don't go in there, that whole thing. But this is like don't make that bet. Don't let Kevin Garnett take your $1 million uncut gem. Like, don't do these things. What are you doing? And they're able to keep all that together and make a coherent story. And it's just a really engaging film. And I still have not seen Good Time, starring Robert Pattinson, which was their previous film. And I'm actually really excited to see it. So I want to see that. I want to see Uncut Gems again. I'm excited just thinking about seeing their films.
It's not that it shouldn't be on somebody's top 10 list. It's not that it's a surprise that it's on your top 10 list. I am in complete denial about that film. And I don't want to think about it anymore. I don't want to think about what happens. I don't want to be in that world. I will eventually get around to doing it again. I can't even honestly say that out loud and really believe myself, because it's such a rough movie. It's so relentless, and it is hunkered down because of Adam Sandler's immensely impressive performance. And once again, it's just like Lupita Nyong'o. We will look back and say, the 5 people nominated for the Oscar this year, okay, yeah, they were all good for them. They all deserved it. Adam Sandler is in the same year? How did that happen? And it's unfortunate that these performances that were nominated, for whatever reason, there's a lot of things that you read about the political reasons behind things. I don't play into that, and I don't even want to have a conversation about it, because it just seems like high school with money, and I don't understand it. So I don't want to give it any more energy than I just did. So if there's any reason other than he just was number 6th or 7th on the list of all these great performances, I don't want to know about it, because his performance is stunning, and he is just kinetic and phonetic and crazy, and just, you're exactly right. That's the perfect way to describe this movie. Don't go in there. Don't give away your gem. Don't lock those guys in there. That guy has been messing with you the whole film. What are you? Unlock the door. You're exactly right. And so it's not that I don't see it. I think it's a masterpiece. I do think it is. Let's say I think it's masterful. I don't want to overuse the term masterpiece, but I just can't give myself over to it again. It was relentless, and that's a compliment. I just don't, I can't do it right now. So maybe someday. All right. So on to my number 5.
Yep.
Marriage Story.
All right. Let's talk about it.
Not on your list. Okay.
Nope.
All right. interesting. I thought we were going to match up a lot more this year than we did.
We got 3 so far. That's not bad.
Oh, yeah, I guess so. For us, that's pretty good, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Marriage Story, we've talked about it. We talked about it on the podcast. We talked about the performances. And the one scene has been often talked about now to where it's now becoming a parody of itself, not the scene, but people talking about the scene. Then again, watching the Oscars, and they showed that scene. And they did the coolest thing with the clips this year.
Yeah.
They did montages for the acting. I thought that was bravo. I spent an hour and a half with my buddy who I talk with every Oscar Eve, my buddy Terry. And he kept saying, so what's the clip they're going to show for Brad? And I said, well, I think it's going to be this. And then my other buddy was like, oh, I think it's going to be this. And we would laugh after we'd say what we thought the scene was because he's just incredible in it. And everything that we suggested was nothing that they showed as a clip. One part of something that I suggested when they talked about, oh, you're on a horse. That guy, when he's talking to Tex at the end. Yeah, no, it was stupider than that. So funny. It was dumber than that. I don't know what he says, but it's hilarious. One day I'll probably have every line memorized from Brad Pitt's Academy Award winning performance because it's stunning. But it just proved to me that, first of all, and we'll get to this later, it proved to me that Brad Pitt deserved the Oscar because they showed every clip other than the ones that we did. The point to that is when they did the best actor and they showed the montage and they showed Adam Driver's and they showed the scene. I was shocked. They showed the scene. A spoiler alert, if anybody hasn't seen it, when he says, I wish you were dead and I wouldn't have to deal with you. I was shocked they showed that, first of all, but then it just all came washing back to me. What a powerful movie that was, and what a hard movie to make, and what a hard movie to balance. And sometimes I'm on her side, and sometimes I'm on his side, and sometimes I don't want to be involved in their life at all. And the supporting characters are amazing. Merritt Wever is amazing. Laura Dern is now an Academy Award winner for her performance. And it was neat to see the montage of her because then you see the subtleties of her performance where you go, this is so great that a performance of a real person won. Not this over the top cry. My mom left me on the doorstep. Woe is me. And I'm so angry at you performance. It was a hunkered down real person. And Laura Dern brought this spark. She shines in it. And she's playing a divorce lawyer. So it's well constructed. It's well written. It's well directed. And it's extremely well acted. So it checks off. And it's about theater people and movie people. So win, win, win. You know, it could not be here. So yeah, Marriage Story, number 5.
Nice. My number 4 is Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
We'll get there.
All right.
But we get to go back because my number 4 is The Farewell.
That was my number 9.
Well, what to say? This is the movie that it didn't get forgotten, but it did get overlooked for the award season. Sort of, because Awkwafina won the Golden Globe. And tell me the grandmother's name.
Susan Zhao.
I still can't get it. She won the Independent Spirit Award, and it won a couple of Independent Spirit Awards. So it didn't go unnoticed in the award season, but I just wish it had been more noticed when it came to the bigger ones, because it's a sweet movie. It's a powerful movie. It had us having a conversation about where our moral compasses were when it came to this subject matter. It transcended an idea or a narrative or a storyline in a movie. It became about what Josh thought he would do and what Paul thought he would do. That's something you and I do on a regular basis, but this just made it accessible to have your own opinion about the movie, because the subject matter is handled so well and Awkwafina's performance is so beautiful. And I can't wait to go back and look at the richness of the film and the shots and break it down, what it looks like. I can't wait to go back and experience the whole thing because it just was beautiful. It's a simple movie. It's quiet. It has moments, and it has a pacing that's not purposefully slow, but it's not like this high energy. It's not Uncut Gems. Let's put it that way. But it's like when you were a little kid and you were going to bed and somebody's reading you a bedtime story and they just read it and you just followed it perfectly and everything just ended the way it's supposed to end and you felt stuff and you rode the ride, and it's just, I cannot wait to see it again.
Well, I think that the big thing that I took away from this film was, one of the big things I took away from this film is the humor and how funny the movie is. And a lot of its humor is based in awkwardness or based in, even though this is cultural and it's Chinese American going back to China, someone who's lived a good portion of their life in America going back to China. But I don't think that the humor was definitely not, from an American standpoint of like, look how funny these people are that aren't, that I can't relate to. It was a specifically, look how funny this situation is because of how awkward it is, and that's the kind of humor that I really enjoy. And the awkwardness is built in based on what a lot of people would think that are their cultural requirements, but ultimately what it comes down to is family, and whether you're on one side of the argument or the other as far as like what her family should have done, whether they should have told her about her ailment or not told her about her ailment, you can still see that the family is making all these decisions out of love, and that's actually, in a lot of ways, it's very touching, but at the same time, it's also rife for humor. I mean, as far as the photo shoots where the grandson and his quote unquote, bride to be are just in this, it's so, weird and oogie and awkward that they don't know what to do, and they're all putting on a show. And so I kind of relish that stuff. I revel in that. And my wife hates it. She's like, why would I want to watch that? We watched the first episode of The British Office, and she was like, well, I'm never going to want to watch that again. And so I was like, it's awesome. So, but, that's just, we have similar sense of humor, but I just love that kind of like awkward humor. And this movie is chock full of it. It's also chock full of great performances. You already brought up Xu Zhao, and Awkwafina was amazing in this too. I know she's got a Comedy Central show now, but I hope that she does go back to movies and really does try to explore her capabilities as an actor and expand her what she does on screen, because she's an engaging performer on screen, and she was great in Crazy Rich Asians, but even in Ocean's 8, it was not my favorite movie, but she put in a great performance, and there were certain scenes in there that were great too. But in this film, she has the ability to kind of stretch her comedic chops and then also be heartfelt in her performance in the more serious parts, and I think she knocked it out of the park.
I think that the movie has made an impact, and that means that Lulu Wang will be getting money for whatever next project she decides to create, and that's all that, when it comes down to that, it matters. And I've seen quite a bit of interviews with, you ever seen that show Off Camera with
I've been listening to
Sam
that
Jones?
Podcast. Yes.
Yeah, I like him.
It's really good.
Yeah. This was before The Farewell came out, and he interviewed Awkwafina, and she's like, I'm brand new to it. I don't know what I'm doing, but I feel at home on set. Sure, I have imposter syndrome, but who doesn't? And then I saw her on one of those actors roundtables things, which I've become obsessed with.
Yeah.
I've seen a ton of them, and the actors on actors. And it's very interesting because she has to say, she doesn't have to, but she, of course, says, I've only been in a couple of films and I've only done a few things, and I'm famous for this video on YouTube, and everybody, it's weird to be talking to Jane Fonda or whoever she's talking to. I can't remember who she's talking to at her roundtable. But the thing that was amazing was that when she was describing what she was doing, it sounded just like what everybody else who had been in the business for 30 plus years does. It's the same kind of process. It's the same kind of insecurities. It's the same kind of craft building. She has whatever it is, and I can't wait to see more from her. And I will say it's becoming a pattern, but it's now becoming a pattern because I'm realizing it is a pattern, that 2019 will be the year that people say, well, why wasn't Awkwafina nominated for the Oscar? Who was nominated for the Oscar? And then they'll have to go back through all five, and then they'll have to talk about Lupita Nyong'o and how she didn't get it, and then blah, 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 blah. It's going to be the year that people are going to be as interested in who was not nominated as they are with who was. And that doesn't happen too often. And she does have the Golden Globes, so that does mean something when it comes to people thinking about, do we want to put the woman in the YouTube video about into our movie? Oh, wait a second. Didn't she win the Golden Globe for that movie? Oh, yeah, I didn't even realize it was her. And then they let her in the door.
Mm-hmm.
So that's all good. But I'm really looking forward to what the Safdie brothers do next. I'm really looking forward to what Rian Johnson does with whatever the Knives Out series is. And I'm really looking forward to what Lulu Wang is going to do, because she has a thumbprint, and I can't wait to see where she goes from there. I hope that, you know what? I was going to say, I hope it's something completely different, but even if it has some kind of similarities, it won't matter to me. I'm going to be interested in it. So yeah, it's a great one.
All right. My number 3 is Avengers Endgame. So I know you don't have that on your list because I know the 2 other movies that are on the list, or the 3 other movies that are on the list. This movie...
I'm showing Josh the end of one of my lists. Do you see where it says Endgame?
Oh yeah, it's on there. Nice, yeah.
It sure is. But I just felt weird saying, here's my top 10. And by the way, these other 15 movies are really great too.
Right? Well, Avengers Endgame to me is just like, I mean, it is the pinnacle of fan service, but it's the pinnacle of fan service done right. And I think that in a lot of ways, this is somewhat of a victory lap maybe for Kevin Feige and for this machine that he's created. And he has the ability to, it's one of those like weird things where like he has the ability to like give us what we want without us knowing that we want it in the way that we want it. Like it's one of those weird, like, you know, he knows that we know, but then we know that he knows that we know, but then it all just happens. And at the end, we're like, wait, I didn't know it was gonna happen that way. But now that it's happened that way, it could have only happened that way. Down to the last line Tony Stark says, and the fact that that was done in pickups, like that they had already shot all that stuff, and then they ended up going back and having Robert Downey Jr. come back in and perform that line. It's well, I mean, at the risk of being cliched, it's like Thanos. It's inevitable. This movie was going to happen in this way. I think it's as much of a sure thing as any other movie could have been this year, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I loved seeing it every time I saw it in the theater. I saw it multiple times in the theater. I've seen it multiple times since then. It's on like Disney Plus now, I think. So, you know, it is infinitely rewatchable for me. I think that this movie in a lot of ways might be like Civil War was for you. Captain America Civil War was for you. Remember a couple years ago, you were just like, I can't stop watching it. And that was my kind of like MO. I was like, well, because I saw it in the theater and then I watched Infinity War again and then I saw it again in the theater. And then, you know, when it came out on Disney Plus, I was just like, oh, well, let me just put this on, you know? And it's like, turns out whatever, like 2.5 hours later, it's like, well, I just watched the whole movie all over again. And it's because it moves along. I mean, it has to move along quickly, but it's also so well structured. It is like 3 separate 1 hour chunks of things. And it has very specific points where it delineates between those parts. And in a lot of ways, each hour feels satisfying in its own way. So even if you just watched one of the 3 hours, you could even watch the middle third and it would still be fun. And you could, you know, move on and go do the dishes afterwards or whatever and be fine. But it's getting everybody together. It's coming up with ways to get around. It's got a built-in gimmick of we gotta get everybody back. You know, that's the whole point of this thing. And you know that the good guy's gonna win. You just don't know how, and you don't know how amazing those shots at the end are gonna be. Even though there's 40 different characters, they all somehow get their own little feature. And the whole movie is not perfect for me. There are scenes that I wish could could have been a little bit different, but ultimately I can't complain about really any of it. So it's very well done. I don't know how a huge corporation can do this. I love independent films. I love films that are self-contained. We're about to talk about one that is our number one. But at the same time, it's a testament to the power of storytelling and the power of long form storytelling. And in a lot of ways, I'm just like, well, whatever comes after it, it can't be anywhere close to as good as this. And we did get Spider-Man Far From Home after it, which was fine. And we're going to get Black Widow, which is going to be like a prequel. So I think that's going to be a little bit more interesting. But yeah, I don't know. Like you'd be hard pressed for me to figure out a way to top Avengers Endgame as far as the current superhero movies go nowadays.
All right, so this is why I will never, ever give you a hard time about being cynical. One, I think it's part of your nature. First of all, I think you're genetically predisposed for it. It might be a generational thing. I don't know. But you're too much of a positive force in this world to be sincerely cynical. I think you have it by nature and you allow it out. And it's I wouldn't say it was a defense mechanism, but I would say it was a way to defend what you didn't like about something. Sarcasm is a little bit easier, or cynical attitudes are a little bit
guarded.
It's guarded, right? But your number third film amongst all of these great films, the one that's 2 positions below what we know is number 1 is Endgame.
Yeah.
So for me, that reminds me that Josh is Us and The Lighthouse and Hereditary and Midsommar and all of those things, but he's also Indiana Jones, Top Gun, all of those things too. And that's a beautiful thing, because there is no reason to not suspend your disbelief to any kind of storytelling process, especially when it's as masterful as most of these films that are on the list. That means your heart and mind is about the storytelling process. It's about what you're taking in, not about what you think it should be, not about what you're bringing to it. It's about what that director and project is giving you at the time. So, I mean, we could talk about Endgame all the time. And by the way, side note, I don't have Disney Plus, but my brother does. And at Christmas time, I turned it on and I was like, well, what am I going to watch? I mean, there's so many things. And I was just flipping through and it happened to stop on Civil War.
Oh God.
I swear it wasn't intentional. I swear. And the whole like shot of going across the water in the beginning to the island and all that other stuff was happening. I was like, oh yeah, I can watch this. I was like, no, stop. Don't get into it. You're never going to. It played the rest of the way. And you're right. I think Civil War is probably going to end up being my favorite just because I can't not watch it. It's infinitely watchable. So if I had the chance to watch Endgame infinitely at this point, I probably would, but I have a feeling that every once in a while I'd have to give myself back over to Civil War. I'm not saying that makes it better or worse or a better film, but Endgame is a really good choice. And I'm glad that you have it on your list. And like I said, the only reason why I didn't mention it is because I had 24 honorable mentions. So I was like, okay, what am I going to do? I gotta get down to at least 5 because it's a top 10 list.
Yeah.
All right. So we're going to my number 3.
Yep.
Is Little Women. And that was your number
6.
Number 6. I mean, we have a podcast about it, and not to disregard talking about it now, but it is a beautifully realized film. I said it was devastatingly beautiful. Those were the 2 adjectives that I used to describe it. I'll stick to it. I hope that people, and it's made like $100,000 or something like that. It's made like
$100 million.
A lot of money. $100 million. $1,000. It's made a lot of money, and so that's a good thing, because every one of these actors and every one of these people who are involved in this project need to be able to continue telling stories because it's so masterfully done. Greta Gerwig is a master. I'm glad she was nominated, and it won costume. And somebody said, oh, those films always win. And I said, first of all, let the person win their Oscar. Second of all, when you see it, what you have to take notice is, because they said, oh, they're just imitating a period. I said, what's the difference between Once Upon a Time and Hollywood then? They're just imitating a period, but you really like that costume design. So what's the difference? Here's the difference. Each one of those young ladies, the 4 main Little Women, all have different attributes to their costumes that allow you to know something about their character. And that's hard to do, because I noticed in a lot of clips of how Florence Pugh in her Academy Award nominated performance is wearing light blue all the time. And I'm like, why is she wearing light blue all the time? And then I noticed that the way that Saoirse Ronan in her Academy Award nominated performance, who I would have voted for, is always wearing some kind of like jacket or some kind of a vest looking thing, which is more of a manly thing than a female thing back then. And then Amy's always in kind of a yellow or a pink or something. And then it dawned on me, it was like, all of those are character traits that the costume designer was smart enough to put as a visual effect to help us. Because if you look at all 4 of those young ladies together, you can tell they're sisters. And sometimes you can't tell who's who, because the redheads look like the redheads, the blondes. I mean, who's who, what? If you don't know specifically who those actors are, you might get lost. And then with the time jumps that Greta Gerwig wrote into her extremely great screenplay, has been a point of contention for a lot of people. Some people were like, I couldn't pay attention to the movie because I couldn't tell what time frame we were in. I was like, oh my goodness, please do not let that be a thing. Because the one thing that we celebrated about that film over and over again about this film, Little Women, is that it was so accessible to understanding the narrative, even though you time jumped. And I've said it once, and I'll say it for one last time on the podcast, possibly, that she eternally had Christmas. She always had spring. She always had summer. She was always in Paris. And how do you do that and tell a story over a couple of years? How do you do that? And Greta Gerwig pulled it off. So I said it was going to be my number 2 favorite film of the year, but I'm backtracking. It's number 3. I'll be honest with you, I wanted it to be tied for number 2, but I don't want to be that guy who can't make up his mind, so he has to decide a tie is number 2. So that's the only reason why it didn't stay at number 2.
Well, it's just because you're sexist. You couldn't have a female directed and written movie as your number 2.
I'm sorry, wait a second. My headset fell down. Were you saying I was sexist or that Hollywood was sexist? Yeah, I kind of agree with you. Hollywood does have an issue with that. That's what you were saying? Yeah, I can see how that's a problem. Yeah, but my soul's filled with joy and envy over somebody being an artist, regardless of their sex. But if you were talking about Hollywood, so we still have an issue.
I think that Little Women is an exquisitely crafted and structured story. I think that hopefully people will study Greta Gerwig's screenplay, because if you juxtapose that against the book, or books, I guess, in this case, multiple publishing, I guess Little Women, when it was published in like two volumes or 2 sections, one year, one the next year. But when you compare those 2 things and you see how she interleaves the 2 stories, the earlier and later stories, that are about that's 7 years apart, I guess, in the film. That to me is that is the linchpin to how this film works in present day, in the current film climate. And I think that we've talked about it in the podcast before, but it afforded her to make emotionally impactful scenes that wouldn't have been that she wouldn't have been capable to do if she would have told it in a linear fashion. So I think that decision right there is 50% of unlocking this story. And I think it's novel and it is bold. And you're right, there may be some people who are confused as to like, oh wait, I don't know what time it is. But I think that she's expecting the moviegoer to go along with her, and she's also confident in her ability to impart to the moviegoer what period of time you're in. And there's going to be stragglers. There's going to be people who aren't going to hang with it, but she's not going to play to the least common denominator. She's going to tell her story the way that she wants to tell her story, and it's going to have a much bigger impact to the people who are able to hang. So I think that is awesome. And you talked about the performances. We had a whole podcast on it. They're great. They're awesome. Florence Pugh, love her. Saoirse Ronan should always get an Academy Award nomination, whatever movie she's in, because she's amazing. But Laura Dern, I said it before, I'll say it again. I think she should have won the Captain Phillips Award for her performance on the stairs scene when Joe comes down the stairs, and it just crushed me. And just thinking about that scene is rough. So yeah, I'm glad Laura Dern won an Academy Award, but in the back of my mind, I'm secretly thinking that it's because of her scene in Little Women that she won it. So, all right. So that was your number 3. Okay. My number 2 is Midsommar. Ari Aster's Midsommar. Imagine that. Shocker. I said on the podcast when we did it like 6 months ago or 8 months ago, I was like, this is my number 1 movie of the year. Like I just kind of came out and said it. And that was before I saw my number 1 movie of the year. This movie hit me a lot differently than Hereditary hit me. And I think that it's a word that I haven't said all podcast, and it's world building. And this movie does it exquisitely. It is amazing. The choices that Ari Aster makes, just in number 1 in the subject matter, is interesting. He has history to pull from with Midsommar, with there being a history of these runes and the ancient versions of these societies, and there's a little bit of questioning as to what goes on and Swedish history, and he's able to kind of mix it all up in a stew and then use that as a backdrop for a relationship movie, for a toxic relationship movie, and he's able to keep us wrapped with what's going to happen next. And it is once again like Uncut Gems or even Us, and to some extent The Lighthouse, all of those movies on my list. It is this sense of dread that we don't even know what we're supposed to be worried about, but if anything, the film it puts you in a particular position from the very first scenes. Those scenes are some of the hardest scenes to get through in the movie, and Florence Pugh plays them well. I don't want to spoil anything for anybody who hasn't seen Midsommar, but the first 10 minutes of that movie is rough, and I think we've talked about it in other contexts, but those first 10 minutes are a primer for the rest of the movie. If you can't get through that part of the movie, then that's the walkout part. Like if you feel an urge to walk out after the first 10 minutes, you need to walk out, because it's not going to get any easier. So I take that as a challenge, and I'm able to separate myself emotionally to where I can move through, and I want to see what else this filmmaker is going to do, what else this filmmaker is going to show me, and how they're going to be able to wrap that into what their focus is in this film. So that was exciting to me, even though it was horrible the first 10 minutes, but it was aggravating but also energizing. So yeah, I'm excited to see what he does next, and I think that it did pretty well. So I think hopefully he'll be able to kind of do whatever he wants to do next. And it also gave Florence Pugh a pedestal that she didn't necessarily. I mean, she headlined her other movies this year, but it was a little bit of a different stretch for her. So I was ultimately impressed with. I was impressed with the score, with the set design, with the costuming, which you talked about in our podcast. It is amazing. Custom made costumes for each of the characters, just crazy. And cinematography was also just impeccable. There's a lot of things in this movie that you kind of take for granted, but it's really difficult to shoot a whole movie with almost no scenes where there isn't any sunlight, and they were able to make it dynamic even. So I don't know. I love this movie. It's somewhat like a Clockwork Orange type thing where I don't necessarily like wake up in the morning and I'm like, good morning, let's go watch Midsommar. But it's a movie that I do get drawn back to. So just because I know that there's more stuff in there I haven't found yet, and I'm excited to find it.
Well, I loved it when I saw it, but I was also perplexed by it. And it isn't sort of like Clockwork Orange. It's actually a really good way to put it. I will see this film again, maybe one more time, maybe two. I'm not sure. I can't handle it. It's too much for me. I don't walk out of films, but I totally get what you're saying in the first 10 minutes. It's wrenching. I can't stand it. And if it had lasted 30 seconds longer, I would have been out of there. I've been like, I can't deal with this, because I knew it was a precursor to what was coming. But did I know we were getting what we got? No. And I will say this, and this is the only other thing that I'll say. It goes there. It goes there. Where any other filmmaker would cut away or do trickery, or we've talked about this with nudity, where the knee and the elbow and the side of the person's chest is just covering everything that it needs to cover. And you instinctually know as an audience member, first of all, nobody sits like that. Second of all, it's you know that they're setting it up so you don't see fun stuff and they don't get a certain rating. In this film, not because of that particular issue being exposed in this film is why I'm saying this. That's not why I'm saying it, but it's a great way to say exactly what I'm trying to say, that it goes exactly where it should go and never holds back, ever, not for a split second. And you and I off podcast need to talk about the ending one more time, because I said something on the podcast, our original podcast, where I am completely 100% wrong about the ending of the film. And I kind of said something that I need to take back, and we can do a revisit maybe in a year from now and revisit some of these films, and we can talk about it then. But just know that I take back what I said at the end of our Midsommar podcast, because I was 100% wrong. But the film is, even if you look away, you've still seen it. I would definitely say, with your list, I would definitely say you cannot watch all of these movies in a row.
No.
Unless you watch it, Midsommar, and then watch Endgame. And then watch, what was the
Uncut
other? Oh,
Gems,
The Lighthouse. And then watch
Once Upon a
and
Time
then
in
watch
Hollywood.
Endgame. In between, you might be okay. Other than that, you need to hold on tightly.
Yeah.
All right. So that was your number
2.
What was that? 2? All right. My number 2 is Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Speaking of which, and it was lower on your list.
Just
Where
number
was it?
4 though. I mean, it's pretty high though.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I trying to remember, because I remember some were lower, but yeah, number 4. We did a podcast. We talked about it during the Oscars. We can continue to talk about it. It is the film that I've seen 3 times this year. I would have never expected it. I will say this, instead of going into a long, how much I frickin' loved this movie, because I loved it. I've seen it 3 times. I will say this. When this film came out, I was doing that play, and theater people are particular people, and they have a particular way about them. Some people. I'm not saying I can confirm or deny I'm like them, but obviously I'm more like them than not, because I'm attracted to that world. They definitely can be very stern with their opinions. And when the movie came out, they hated it. These people that I was working with, they called it the worst Tarantino film of all time. They were disappointed in there wasn't as much dialogue. And then they kind of do this thing, and it's all innocent. It's just a movie opinion. It's not a statement about any of these people. They were all super sweet, super kind, and very professional. But, people's opinions, when they find out that you have a vested interest in a subject, becomes very pointed. And, I don't shut up about having a podcast. It's in my bio of it's in my acting bio. It's in the programs of every play that I've done. I'm proud of this podcast. I'm proud that I get to do this. I'm excited that I get to do this. So I often mention it without really realizing I am, to the point where now people are kind of joking me about it, but that's all right. That's fine. They can joke me about it. It went from, oh, this film and blah, 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 and I didn't like it. Oh, by the way, Paul, don't you have a podcast? What did you think about it? And I was like, well, I haven't seen it yet, which was great because I didn't have to get involved in all of that. And then I saw it and fell in love with it. And everything that they said about it that I wasn't really paying attention to, I sort of walked away. But I picked up enough. I thought to myself, the whole thing about certain directors is we like for them to do something different than what they normally do. And that's exactly what Tarantino does. This is a Tarantino film, but it doesn't have that striking middle in the beginning, and the end isn't halfway through the film. It doesn't have any of that stuff. It's pretty linear, comparatively speaking. I mean, there are flashbacks and flash forwards and stuff like that, but it's pretty linear comparatively speaking to most of his films. And compared to The Hateful Eight, it is a quiet movie, and there is less interactions between characters and less words. But to me, I thought that was a good thing, because I thought Hateful Eight was a little too much. Like, it was too much talking. I couldn't follow everything. Then when they put it on Netflix and broke it up into 4 different sections, I fell in love with Hateful Eight because I could pay attention to just that hour and not worry about what was coming 2 or 3 hours later on and having to remember all of what I had to remember. Sometimes that's a bit overwhelming. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood does none of that. And so somebody said to me a week or 2 later, hey, did you ever see Once Upon a Time in Hollywood? And it stopped everybody in their tracks. They were all like, not really, I'm being dramatic, but it felt that way. And I said, yes, I did. And they said, what'd you think? I said, I loved it. I think it's one of his best. I think it's going down in Oscar history as probably his best chance to win the Oscar for Best Picture. I won't be surprised if it does. I haven't seen everything yet, obviously. Leo will be nominated. Brad Pitt will be nominated. There's a little issue with them being co-leads, but whatever, they'll figure that out. They'll both be nominated for lead. I loved it. I love the fact that it was quiet in places. And I've discovered what I truly love about it, which is everything. But I love the fact, and we've talked about this, I love the fact that there's a joyful character in that movie with no conflicts. And I think that's hard to pull off. Sharon Tate, played by Margot Robbie, is just a joy. It's just a pleasure to watch her. And she's so happy. And she's so joyful, and she's so glad to be Sharon Tate in Hollywood at this time. And the way she dances at the Playboy Mansion, she's happy. The way she dances as she's packing that one time, she's happy. The way she delivers that line about when she goes to see herself in the movie, and she says, oh, how much? And they say, whatever it is, 45 cents or whatever it was. And she goes, what if I'm in the movie? And the whole dialogue that happens is so sweet. And then her watching the movie with her feet up on the chair and just relaxed, and she's laughing and she's redoing her whole scene as it's being done. It's just joyful. And if you had ever told me that a Quentin Tarantino movie would have somebody who had no conflict in it, who was filled with pure joy, and he would get away with it, I would have laughed at you. But he does. And it won production design the other night. It should have. It was nominated for everything else, which it should have been. And I think it's a masterpiece. And like I said, I don't want to use that word too much because then it loses its weight. But I discovered the third time watching this movie, there's simply nothing about this movie I don't like. Every single thing I like. Every choice he made. I love watching an actor learn their lines. I love not realizing that you're getting ready to watch an actor do that scene. I love the fact that they play that as if it's part of a scene of a movie that you know what's going on by that point. Timothy Olyphant's in it. Hello. So if it wasn't for the number 1 that's on my list, this would be my favorite movie of the year. But it's number 2 because of the number 1.
All right. Well, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, it seems like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is kind of like distilled Quentin Tarantino. This is his 9th film, and I think that he understands he has enough cachet to make a movie that has all of the pieces of the things that he really enjoys, one of which are old films and another of which is old television and Hollywood in general. Like, just the fact that he's able to be and work in this world that he idolized so much as a young kid and growing up. All of the knowledge, all like the vast knowledge of these TV shows, the takeoffs, Bounty Law is a takeoff of, Wanted Dead or Alive or something like that. I mean, there's a bunch of like corollaries for the fake shows that he makes, and it's all out of they're all homages to shows that he really enjoyed or movies that he really enjoyed, and he's wrapping all that up into a story that is focusing on old time Hollywood, focusing on a very specific period in time, and then also doing what he's done in the last few movies, which is somewhat revisionist history of what are the possibilities that would happen, and what could have happened to someone like Sharon Tate if she wasn't part of the, grisly Manson murders, and how can we celebrate this person who we lost too early and someone who was poised to have a successful career or a great career, even if it wasn't quote unquote successful. It might have been something that, maybe she would have been in one of those movies that Quentin Tarantino loved as a young person, and we lost that. And so he's trying to get his own version of retribution on the people who took her away from us. And then at the same time, he's also doing this extensive character study of a specific type of person in Hollywood, in the Leonardo DiCaprio character, and also another one in the Brad Pitt character. So I thought it was awesome. The music's amazing. You're right. The production design is amazing. Well-deserved Oscar. And this movie is driven by that music. And I love when I saw the movie, I immediately started listening to the soundtrack, and the soundtrack is great. And it's just, and I loved, we talked about this in the podcast that we did on this, I loved how he intercut the air checks from 1969, the summer of 1969, with the actual DJs from KHJ, and how they did the lead-ins to the songs and hit the post on the beginnings of the songs, and the soundtrack seamlessly weaves between those songs and then the weird sun tanning lotion that you can buy, and all of these ads that they had on in the late 60s. So it's very well done, and I think it's a filmmaker at the top of his craft who's got a toy box full of eager and willing actors just willing to come in, even if it's for a day, whether that's Clifton Collins Jr. or Timothy Oliphant or Scoot McNairy, who was Businessman Bob. These guys are in there for literally a minute of the film, and he's able to get those guys. Luke Perry in his last role. I mean, it's just a list of actors that it seems like only Quentin Tarantino could have gotten in these particular roles. Rebecca Gayheart for literally like 2 lines. I mean, it's crazy, but yeah, I think that the lead characters did a great job. And do you think that Brad Pitt? I know you think that Brad Pitt should have won the Academy Award, but do you think this is somewhat of a here's your acting award, Brad Pitt? You've been a good actor for the last 30 years, 25 years.
Interesting. I mentioned my buddy Terry earlier. We have an Oscar Eve phone call. We've done it for 18 years now. It usually lasts about an hour and a half. And we talked about what clip they were going to show when they showed Brad Pitt. And Terry's hypothesis was this a performance that was worthy of an Oscar? And he loved the movie and he loved Brad Pitt. And he was going to be happy when Brad Pitt won. That's not the point. The point was this verging on the career Oscar merry-go-round. And if it wasn't, or if it was, then what would be the scene that would prove that this was an Oscar caliber performance? Then we spent 10 or 15 minutes imitating Brad Pitt, trying to figure out what the scene was. And then I spent the rest of the evening imitating Brad Pitt, trying to figure out what the scene was and laughing my ass off every single time I would mention anything that he would do in that movie. Anything. I said that the two scenes that they probably might, one scene that they might show is when he goes up to Dakota Fanning and I can't remember if it's George. I think it's George.
Yeah, Spawn.
I'm coming in there, Red. And then he flicks the screen and he goes, and this ain't going to stop me. For whatever reason, just my line reading right there is not funny at all. But the way he does it is hilarious because you know he believes it. And he has this off timing thing that he can do. Most actors would flick the screen, then take the glasses off, or take the glasses off, then flick the screen, but he does it almost simultaneously. It's very interesting to watch. That said, why can't we have a performance from an actor where he's just solid the whole movie? And we do have a precedence for it. Different movies, but we have a precedence for it. Atticus Finch, Mahershala Ali in Moonlight. There are just everyday people who are Laura Dern, Marriage Story. There are everyday people who have been, as characters, who have been nominated for an Oscar. And I don't know how to articulate how that is as impressive to me as any kind of showy over the top scene that one person might have. Sean Penn was nominated for Mystic River and won, but he was also in another movie that year called 21 Grams. Mm-hmm. I actually think his performance in 21 Grams is way more impressive because it's so much more subtle. Now, I loved him in Mystic River. The movie is hard for me because there's stuff in it that I don't think completely works, but his performance is stunning. And that big cry scene, is that my daughter in there, is horrifying. And it gets me, it gut wrenches me every time. And they'll show it for his lifetime, that's his Oscar winning moment. But there's something about the way he just lights a cigarette in 21 Grams that I find just as intriguing as that big over the top moment. So no, I think that Brad Pitt deserved the Oscar. I think only he could have done it that way in this movie. There's something intangible about his performance. I can't put my finger on it. That's what makes it intangible. So yes, I don't think we need to have a discussion, not you and I, just people in general, don't need to have a discussion of, was this just, here's Brad Pitt's acting Oscar. And the people that I was talking to about it, who were going along that lines, I said, well, he's nominated for Curious Case of Benjamin. Oh, he's good in that. He was nominated for 12 Monkeys. Oh, he's good in that. And then I said, well, Sean Penn won for Milk, and they were like, oh, okay, so now we know why he didn't win for Curious Case. And Kevin Spacey won for Usual Suspects. Oh, we know why he didn't win for 12 Monkeys. And I said he was also nominated for Moneyball. And one of the people said, oh, that's the one he should have won.
I think so too.
But that's no different than he has one or two outbursts in that movie because he has like a temper problem as a character. But other than that, it's a very subtle performance. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting to me that most people have this discussion about, and will have this discussion about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, now answer their own question. The question is, did Brad Pitt deserve it for this character? Yes, he did. Did he do something that was Oscar worthy? Yes, he did. And if you believe he was Oscar worthy and should have won for Moneyball, then there should be no problem that he won for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
I can see that.
You're saying there is. I'm just saying for discussion point.
Yeah, I can totally see that. All right, it's time. We've got to talk about Parasite again.
Hey, I do have to say this. This is the first time in 6 years that we have the same number one film.
It's well-deserved. Bong Joon-ho did a good job.
Well-deserved.
We've said too much about it already, I think. I mean, after seeing it again on Sunday, I can't see a bad thing. I can't see a flaw in it. And that's like 3 times. I've seen it 3 times now. I will see it a lot more. Maybe there's something that else. Maybe a shot will be out of focus, or maybe something will be just like from a mechanical standpoint wrong about it. But I'm not seeing it. So I've learned a lot more about how Bong Joon-ho makes his films now, and there's been an interesting story that I heard where he got into a situation with Snowpiercer where Harvey Weinstein was like, oh, you got to cut this, you got to cut that, you got to move this around here. And he was having to kind of like wrest a little bit of control of his film in some ways. He was able to get certain things back by certain machinations, but it ultimately wasn't his thing. completely. And what he's done since then in subsequent movies is he meticulously storyboards his movies to the point where he doesn't shoot coverage. So imagine it would be like an artist that has like a paintbrush with exactly the paint that they want and no other paints. And, you know, we just painted our, Steph just painted our laundry room. And, you know, right next to the paint bucket thing, you know, the paint dispenser deal, she has not only the brush, but also a wet rag. Because when you get paint on the trim, you got to wipe it off the trim. Or if you get paint on the wrong thing, you got to wipe it off. And that's ultimately what coverage is when you shoot a scene between two people, you have shots of each of the people and maybe an establishing shot of both of them together in the same frame. And the reason why you do that is so that you can pick back and forth between certain takes, or if something goes wrong with a particular take that you like, you always have somewhere else to cut, so you can use a portion of that take and not have to ruin the whole take or not have to throw away that whole take because of the other things. But he's so meticulous with where he places the camera and what's in the frame with his storyboards that he doesn't do that. He doesn't have a safety net. That's crazy, I think, in some ways, because it's an expensive proposition making a movie. But at the same time, what it allows him to do is have complete control over his movie because there's nowhere else to go. There's nothing else to show. You are going to see exactly what he wants you to see throughout the film because that's all he's shot. And so he's ultimately doing the editing while he's in the storyboard process and then while he's shooting the film. And you hear a lot of filmmakers say, really, the movie is made in editing. The film is created during the edit. And for Bong Joon-ho, presently, that's not the case. He's got such a masterful hand on this craft that he's able to create something that is wholly his own and he has complete control over. And we just found out that he's really good at it.
So it's like we record through the Tascams and we also record through Skype just in case.
Yeah.
So that's our coverage, right? So if something goes bad, we still have the conversation on Skype. So, okay, yep. I get all that. That's crazy. It's crazy, but it makes sense because this movie is so precise. And I said it and people looked at me like I was crazy. And I'm not saying that I am right, but I'm saying this is what I felt. It is the movie of our lifetime. It is the movie, and I'm not saying that's not going to be other great things coming. I'm not saying it's the greatest thing in our lifetime. I'm saying it's the movie that we have seen in our lifetime that will be talked about for many, many, many years to come. It is how Citizen Kane is revered in our ideas of movie making, and meaning you and I and everybody else's. We have grown up with that being the pinnacle of the movie making experience and the movie going experience, deservedly so, because Citizen Kane is a masterpiece. That said, I think Parasite is the type of film, it is the film that 50 years from now, 100 years from now, they're going to be talking about it, dissecting it, and they're going to be really proud of the people who lived on the earth in 2019 who got it right and celebrated this film in its time. And you and I can continue to talk about this film. I will continue to watch this film. I will never, ever be like, oh no, I don't really have, I'm not in the mood for that. If I have the time and it's in front of me and I've got nothing else I need to do, I will watch this movie. I can tell it's that type of movie. The only two things I want to say on the podcast is that it is as great as everybody says it was. And that was the experience that I had. I was surprised about that. It did not win production design. And we talked about that because Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. But the thing that people need to understand, and I don't think this is a spoiler, is that everything was created for this movie. They're all sets.
Yeah.
Some of them CGI'd, some of them built, but that scene in the alleyway in the rain coming down the stairs with all of the wires is a set.
Yep.
That does not exist in real life. It was built for this movie. That to me is mind blowing. The second time I saw it, I was watching to see, am I going to notice that this doesn't look as real? Because, you know, when you first see it, you're not paying attention to things like that. You are, but you're not. I remember all those wires and thinking how crazy that is and what's with men and all their wires. And I thought, that's crazy. And man, he picked the right place to shoot that scene. But then you find out it was created for the film. And so the second time I'm watching it and I'm like, does that look fake to me now that I know it's a set? Not at all. It's even more mind blowing that I know it's a set. And the second and last thing that I'll say is the Oscars speak to the 14-year-old little boy in me, where when I saw the Oscars when I was 10, 11, 12, 13, and 14, I didn't know what Dog Day Afternoon was. I didn't know what that movie was. I didn't really understand it. It made me feel kind of weird, but the Oscars were celebrating it. So it had to mean something. At least the world thought it meant something. Terms of endearment. I was a little bit older then, but I'm thinking to myself, everybody keeps talking about this Shirley MacLaine person. Who is this? What? So the Oscars have brought me those people. They have brought films to me that I would have never have explored. Dogtooth. I waited a while to get to it, but it was nominated for Best International Film or Foreign Language at the time. And I got to it eventually because it has the stamp of the Oscars. Not that that means it's a good quality film. It means that it was interesting enough to call these people into the world to say, hey, pay attention to this film. Can you imagine being that 14-year-old kid and hearing about Parasite and then exploring Parasite? It would be, I can't even imagine it. I can't even imagine, because not only did it win 4 of the 6 that it was nominated for, which is crazy great, but it won Best Picture. So it's hard. So even if you have just like an interest in movies and the Oscars give you things to check off your list, I've never heard of Once Upon a Time in America or in Hollywood. So the Oscars talked about it. I'll go see that. I can't imagine what it would be like to be younger and influenced by the Oscars. And that's the movie that they gave to me. I would be so happy. I would be over the moon. I couldn't even imagine what that would be like. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, because can you imagine that being the bar that is set for Academy Award winning pictures? What's next year going to be? But it must be so great to be young and be influenced by something, and that's the product. And I use that word purposefully. That's the product that they're promoting. And this is the film that you get. Yeah. It would be mind-blowing, because the film is, I wish I had the right adjectives to continue to talk about this film, but I can't think of anything else other than perfection and movie of our lifetime.
Wow. That's great. I think it's a great way to end it. So, all right. Well, you can check us out on the web. Well, you know what? 2019 was a great year for movies. And I think that we've had a few years where I've noticed that a lot of our, top fives or whatever have been somewhat the same. But in this year, our top fives, top tens were kind of all over the place. We did have 5 films that we shared in our list, but actually 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We had 5 films that we shared on our list, but they were kind of all over the place. And so I think that says a lot about the films that we had to choose from, and the fact that we both, picked, somewhat disparate films and put them at different places on our lists, because there was a wealth of great films to choose from. So that's awesome. And I hope that 2020 is the same, but, we'll see. So we've got a David Fincher movie coming out. We've got a Christopher Nolan movie coming out. We've got a James Bond movie coming out. I mean, it's going to be directed by Cary Fukunaga. So, I mean, there's you can kind of go down the list. It's going to be an interesting year. So those could all go amazingly, and those could all go poorly. You never know. But yeah. So here's to hoping for another great year in film for 2020. So you can check us out on the web at actorandengineer.com. You can go to facebook.com/actorandengineer, and you can tweet us at actorengineer. And we'll see you next time.